joining us for the webinar today. We're looking at young people in sports in position of trust. My name's Michelle North. I'm joined by Nick Flynn today. We've also got a young person on the phone joining us who I'll introduce you to a bit in a little while. Hopefully over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to go through this whole arena really of young people in a position of trust, and we'll start looking at the pathway through sport, that transition from player to coach or official or volunteer, and how that can be navigated, some of the safeguarding risks to young people within those positions, particularly if they are navigating from being a player into those new roles, the challenges for young people and for organisations who are still responsible for these young people, and how do we make sure that we are making sure they're safe and that the young people that they are looking after are also safe. We'll look at some of the safeguarding issues that arise out of this area, and like I said before, we'll have an opportunity for some questions. What we're hoping to achieve today is about raising this as an area for consideration and think about what you've got in place already, hopefully hear some ideas that you might want to take back to your organisation, and how we can maybe drill down much more robust procedures that are kind of much more secure than things just happening because that's just the way it's always been within your organisation. So I'm going to hand over to Nick now.
Hi everybody. I'm just going to very briefly have a look at a young person's path through their sport. This isn't necessarily how everybody does it, but it would be typical for a lot of young people. I guess often starting with being very young and getting involved in formal play and activities, moving into nursery and primary school activities that might be a bit more structured, junior school teams perhaps, joining sports clubs and taking part in competitive sport through their sports clubs, maybe senior school teams and colleges. And for the talented fewer, perhaps reaching the dizzy heights of regional, national or international team representation. So at any point, people might be going along that kind of path, and then there are opportunities either during that path or after it for young people to establish themselves in positions of trust. So some examples are they might take up coaching and assistant coaching positions. They might be supporting events or taking on other voluntary roles. They may be taking part in organisational leadership in a kind of wider sense. And of course, many young people end up in positions where they're officiating the sports that they've been engaged in. So very briefly, just want to think recognise the benefits in the first instance for young people, but for organisations and the sport wider of young people being encouraged to move into these positions. I've got some up there, so clearly widening both their sport and their social experiences, developing new skills, and I think that's everything from developing technical skills within the sport to new skills in relation to their particular positions, organisational skills and whatever. Personal development, which links in with that. For sports, it's widening their volunteer base and very importantly bringing new blood into the organisation of their sport and other aspects. Clearly, it provides yet another route for sports to listen to and take on board young people's perspectives. And I think it's clear to say that involvement of young people in sports positions enhances the organisation's image as being very inclusive and open. There are numerable roles that young people can take, and we've just got some examples, and there's lots of different vernaculars depending on the different sports and organisations that they're in. So, most obviously there's kind of assistant coaching and coaching organisations, but CSPs, we'll talk about young ambassadors, young people that are in volunteer roles, youth leaders. Officiating is another big area. Event organisers, so we know through the school games at different levels that there's opportunities for young people to contribute there. Mentoring and buddying for other young people and other young participants. A lot of sports are now developing youth panels to enhance the voice of young people through their sports, and clearly they're populated by young people, often young adults. Some are board or management group members, and increasingly, I think, organisational influencers. It's not a formal role, but I think that's genuinely what the young people are contributing.
We've had a question in from Shirley just saying, what age young people are you referring to?
I think, well, I think the youngest age is going to be as young as people would think it's appropriate. So clearly there are, in the early peaking sports, young people may more naturally be involved in positions of trust at an earlier age. Young people, I guess, from our point of view, in this respect, I wouldn't be limiting to the legal definition of 18 and under. And I know in a number of organisations, and increasingly with the CPSU, we're considering people under the age of maybe 23, 25 in the same kind of sense. So we're not limiting ourselves for this webinar to young people who are only under 18. If that answers the question.
Thank you very much. So we're going to have an opportunity now. I'm going to talk to Lauren Chianti, who is a young official from Voucher, England, and who's joining us on the phone. So I'm hoping all the technology works well. So good morning, Lauren.
Morning. Morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Yeah, that's fabulous. So could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Laura. I'm 18 years old and currently in my last month or so of sixth form. I'm studying sport, IT and sociology. And hoping to go off to uni in September to study physical education and coaching. I'm currently a level 1 coach and level 3 national referee in the sport of boccia.
That's brilliant, thank you. So what kind of sports did you play as a child, and how did you become involved with boccia, and how did that involvement develop?
Yeah, so as a child I was very active, interested in everything and wanting to take part in everything. Tried a lot of different sports, football, gymnastics, swimming, did a bit of karate for a bit as well. And I got into boccia through school. My secondary school, the TA made a team and just asked me and a few friends, do you want to go along and just make up the numbers, really have a laugh and give the disabled students somebody else, like some other people to interact with, because apart from us, they were on their own really. So we went along, had a laugh, and we ended up going to 2012 as a group, watch boccia being played on a professional level. And obviously because I didn't have a disability, I couldn't compete. So through 2012, we managed to, we realised that there is a way that I could still be involved in the sport, even though I can't compete, through refereeing and coaching. So we ran a young officials course at the school and basically never looked back. I've refereed at county, regionals and national level in the last 3 years, and I'm a regular volunteer with Voucher England. Like I said, refereeing at different levels, and I also coach sort of 3 clubs a week, community, school, and also once a month I'm with the academy where I coach sort of higher level athletes. I've been selected to do camps with the Youth Sport Trust to develop my skills as an official to make me be the best that I can be. And then I've had the chance to go back mentoring other young officials as well through that programme. So yeah, it's sort of just all taken off in the last few years.
That's great. Just for people who are listening who might not know, could you just explain what boccia is?
Yep. So boccia is a target sport, very similar to bowls. It's played indoors in a sports hall. The principle of bowls is the same. You have 2 teams, red and blue, and aiming to get as close to the white ball, the jack ball, as you can.
Fab. Thank you very much for that. So in terms of all your experience that you discussed, what's been your best experience in terms of boccia, involvement in boccia?
Yeah, so I guess the thing that stands out most is the support that I've had, because, the main thing I've got from refereeing and coaching is a massive improvement in my confidence and self-belief. But that wouldn't have been possible without the support that I've had. You can ask anybody that knows me. My confidence has massively grown since I've been involved in sport. And, without, I used to be really quiet and shy and everything. And the thought of doing something like this would have, sent me into panic. I would have never done it. Even at the weekend, one of my friends turned around to me and said, jokingly, like, oh, do we all remember when Lauren was just that quiet little girl in the corner and wouldn't say anything? And And I just sat back and laughed, and it just made me realise that actually I have come quite far. But yeah, like I said, the support that I've had has meant that I've been able to develop. And if I honestly believe that if I did not have the support that I've had and the backing and the confidence that other people have had in me, I would not be where I am. Not just in my sport, in my education as well. I don't think I would have sort of applied for uni or got my offer, and it's helped me so much in life as well. Because I'm always being pushed to do things that I'm scared of doing, whether it's through working with different people or traveling on my own, even simple things like that, leading sessions and managing difficult situations. Refereeing's given me a bit more of a direction and a purpose, and coaching as well. I know what I like to do, and I know where I want to go now, and it's made me much stronger. And I've learned how to develop my communication skills, and I've learned the importance of being empathetic towards others and understanding individuals, and I just get a buzz from it. And without the support I wouldn't be where I am. That's the main thing that I've got from refereeing.
Thanks, Lauren. So kind of on the flip side, what's been the biggest challenge for you as a young person taking on these formal roles?
Yeah, I guess as a young person, obviously you get some looks like, oh, she's young, and I mean I'm pretty small as well, so that doesn't really help me. That makes me look a lot younger than I am. You get the people sort of undermine you, I think, sometimes as well, because you're so young. Like, oh, do they know what they're doing? Should they be here? But the support, like I said before, the support is the main thing. I've had a few difficult situations, sort of. I ran a competition on behalf of Bocce England about a month or so ago. One of the parents wasn't happy with, how we were imposing the rules. As the team kept getting violations. It was actually my team. So I was there on behalf of Bocce England running the competition, not for my team. So I had to sort of separate myself there, and which was quite difficult as a young person. Your athletes always like to come and say hello and everything, which is fine, but it's keeping that separation. So one of the parents was getting quite angry with me with, the day. I just kept my cool and explained the situation, that it's a fully sanctioned competition. And he asked when he could go to voice his opinion. So I just sent him, I guided him in the direction of Bocce England and said, you can pass on your feedback to them, which he did. And, I stayed calm throughout the whole thing. I apologised and thanked him for coming on the day and everything. Almost told him what he wanted to hear, because it just calmed the whole situation down a bit. I then, after the competition, explained what had happened to Bocce England as well, so that it wasn't just a shock when they had something appear from the competition. And they dealt with the situation really well. They got back to me and told me everything that had happened, and it was really nice to know that I could go back to the club on a Friday and not feel awkward about it. We just let it go. We haven't really spoken about it, but I think that's made it. Bocce England dealt with it in the best way, and it's let us move on. Also on court you have problems with parents or assistants, whether they're on court or spectating. They don't always agree with decisions you've made, which happens in most sports. And as I know, when I first started quite a while ago, I had an assistant have a go at me on court and didn't know what to do. I turned to the head referee, who basically oversees the whole competition. So if we have any problems like that, they're the people that we go to. They come and support us on court. And he dealt with the situation, made me feel much more relaxed, told me that I'd done the right thing, and carried on with the game and the rest of the day. The head referee's role is, really important for officials, and especially young officials, because they're the main person that you go to. So yeah, even though sort of my age let me down to start with, well, not let me down, but it sort of made me struggle a bit to start with, it didn't really have a big impact because of the support I had around me.
That's good to hear. Thanks, Lauren. So in terms of the transition into these different roles, what safeguarding training or information and guidance have you received?
Yeah, so as part of my level 1 coaching course, I had to complete a safeguarding protecting children in sport course. That was, I couldn't pass my level 1 without that course, so that was an important part of it. And also we get quite regular guidance and information through emails and newsletters and stuff that Bocce England send out. We all know who to go to if we need anything sort of in regards to safeguarding. So yeah, it's all quite clear.
Brilliant. So looking back, is there anything else that you think would have been helpful to you in your role that you didn't receive, or for those that are just starting out in that kind of journey?
Yeah, so I've been quite lucky with what I have experienced through sport, and again, comes back to the support thing. At my first nationals, I was buddied up with experienced referees, which helped us introduce us to everybody and the tight knit sort of community of our sport, and I think that worked really well. Having somebody experienced to turn to, they were with us on court. They gave us feedback after every game, and that was really helpful. Through the program that I did with the Youth Sport Trust, I had a mentor who, has basically seen us from the very beginning right the way through, and I'm still really close with her, and it's nice to be able to have that relationship with somebody, because still, I'd go to her if I needed anything. And quite recently, I've actually taken on the role of sort of being that buddy for other young officials that are coming through. So last weekend it was our nationals, and one of the young officials from last year came back, and people know him, but he's not with us regularly, and I felt like it was kind of my role to make him feel welcome and comfortable, because I was there a couple of years ago. So I think if anything had to change, maybe just having that buddy as somebody who was a bit younger, somebody who was in that position more recently, because it makes it a lot more, because I knew exactly how the lad was feeling at the weekend, and so I sort of took it upon myself to go and help him, because I knew the right things to say, and I knew what was going on in his head a bit better than some of the other guys might have done. So yeah.
I think that's really useful to hear. We've got a lot of organisations joining us today, so hopefully they can take something out of that. So if you could send a message to the people who run sport, what would you like to say to them in terms of how they encourage young people to get involved in the different roles, and what they could do better to support them?
Yeah, I guess keeping them interested is obviously what you want to do, and I think as a young official, that's the main thing I want to get from an NGB as well. Keeping them up to date with opportunities that are coming up, giving them the opportunities and challenges as well. Don't just give them the easier games or the easier competitions. Challenge them, push them, because that's how we're going to get better. Don't make us feel unsupported. Because I think that's quite sometimes that goes unrecognised, that sport is a very many communities in sport are very tight. So it can be quite intimidating to come into that community and that group and not know anybody. Everybody knows everyone, and it's quite difficult sometimes for a young person. And I know I found it quite difficult, but having that person with me, that person that I can turn to and ask those questions, voice those concerns, and it made that transition a lot smoother, from very low level into the higher level with the bigger athletes, bigger competitions. Make them feel welcome and wanted. Is, like I said, it's difficult coming into a sport, and just the main thing, I guess, is trying to understand each individual and their motives for what they want from their role. So whether they're a coach or an official, understand them and understand what they want to achieve from the role that they're doing. Because it might be that they might want to be an Olympic, Paralympic referee, or whatever, or they might just want to improve something personal, and I think that's the most important thing, so that then you can give them the best opportunities, challenges and support that they need in order to achieve those goals.
That's brilliant. We've got a question that's come in, Lauren. Have you had any contact from your county sport partnership, and have they supported you in any way?
Not masses of contact with county sport partnership. I run a club on behalf of a company that works in my county, and I'm pretty sure they get quite a lot of support from county sport partnership, but me personally, I haven't had much contact with them now.
Yeah, that's just one of the questions that come in. We are going to ask you some more questions, but we'll save them to the end. But I just want to say thank you so much, Lauren. She's going to stay on the webinar with us, but I'm going to hand you over to Nick.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. It's very, very impressive. Very impressive at such a young age. Makes me reflect on what I was doing when I was 18, which is nothing as positive and constructive as that, but fantastic. So one of the things that was Lauren just touched on there was clearly one of the major issues for organisations in thinking about young people in positions of trust is about the risks, potential risks to them. And I don't mean necessarily as in terms of the heavy end of sexual abuse and physical abuse stuff, though we need to be cognizant of that. What I've put up on screen is a couple of the sort of heavier ends of the spectrum, and these are two quite well-known kind of instances where young officials in this instance, where I think abused is a reasonable word to use. I guess the referee at the top, the thing to remember is when he was experiencing what he experienced, he was actually 14 and refereeing, and the girl at the bottom, the schoolgirl referee, when those kind of statements were made, was actually refereeing an under-9s game, which is just both depressing and shocking, but I think kind of reminds us that we can't take anything for granted, and that quite often, you know, the kind of standard rules of behaviour can't be relied on. Lauren's talked very clearly about the kind of issues about some adults around young people in positions of trust and authority, questioning or undermining them in some kind of way. And I know from my experience with talking to a lot of county sports partnerships about their level 3 events, that there are quite frequently reports of young officials in particular, but other young volunteers being challenged and I think abused with a little a by people who are watching, often spectators, but sadly sometimes teachers and sometimes other people within sport who clearly should know better. So there really is a kind of issue. What I take most of all, and most clearly the message from what Lauren said was the need for support. So we can't necessarily stop all the bad stuff happening. We can do what we can to try to prevent that. But I guess what came really clearly through her recent challenging incidents when she was umpiring was the value of an organisation providing the right kind of support. So even if events still happen, actually how the organisation rallies around and provides support to the young people is going to be pretty critical. So I'm just going to mention, this is not so much about young officials in particular, but just generally mention something about positions of trust, sport and the law. And as a lot of you will know, this is something that's been under the microscope in the light of the football revelations and the historical abuse cases, a lot of which seem to involve young people and people in positions of trust around them. So where we're at in relation particularly to 16 and 17-year-olds is that legislation that would apply, say, to teachers, which would preclude them from having a sexual relationship with a 16 or 17-year-old who is in their care, would be legal under current legislation. But that doesn't at the moment extend to sports coaches and other roles within sport. The NSPCC, as a consequence, the NSPCC, the CPSU, and a lot of you out there and a lot of sports organisations are actively seeking a change in that legislation to make sure that sports coaches are included. And what that would mean is that in the future, if the legislation was changed and the guidance was changed, then a sports coach with responsibility for a young person of 16 or 17 would not be allowed, legally would not be allowed to have engage in a sexual relationship with a young person. As it stands within sport, the majority of governing bodies already describe that kind of relationship as a significant breach of their code of conduct, and many are managing that on an internal disciplinary basis. But the feedback that we got when we talked to sports about this is it would be much easier for them, clearly, if it was simply a matter of legality. Some sports already prohibit relationships between coaches and any athlete, so they don't limit it to under 18s, and I guess that's a matter of for the individual sports. The reason for mentioning this is I would say that young people in positions of trust, this should, and I hope at some point in the future, apply to. It shouldn't matter whether somebody happens to be a young person in a position of trust. The same rules of engagement should apply.
Thanks, Nick. So kind of over to you listening, really. So considering what you've heard, thinking about the transition from a young person being a participant to being in a position of trust, What do you think are the main changes and the challenges from the young person's perspective? We're going to give you an opportunity to look at this from an organisation side of things in a second, but just think about it from a young person. We've been getting some questions through, which is great, and we will have some time at the end to answer them, but I just want you to think about some of the challenges that you're currently facing. Okay, so some of the potential issues for young people that have come up, and I think it's right, it's about being taken seriously, some of the stuff that's coming through at the moment, being an equal part, that responsibility. So we've got a few that we came in that I'll go through now. So it is about this change of role, and with that, the different responsibilities. And are we really clear with young people around what they look like? There is a lot of assumptions that happen when people naturally journey from one position to another, and are we taking the time to really clarify them, that they understand what they are, rather than just assume that they have that there are different expectations of young people from others, that suddenly if they put a different coat on, that they are suddenly an adult really, and they are making adult decisions and they are responsible. And yes, they have added responsibility, but it doesn't take away from the fact that they are still young people. Okay, so someone's talked about social media, and if you're a friend with someone already, and as you can see, there's a bit there about existing and potential relationships with peers. And this is really tricky. If you've been a player within that club, you are managing a different type of relationship. So as a sport, how are we helping them navigate, which actually can be quite a murky pool, to make sure that those boundaries that we have in places for coaches and officials are clear to young people as well, to help them kind of find their way in all this. And it is about, sometimes sports and organisations rely on people doing the right thing, and well, it's just common sense. Well, what we know when things haven't gone quite right is that actually there was nothing robust in place that would help people. So Lauren described doing that with her own team. In her explanation of it,
what she described was having to put a bit of clear water between herself and her existing relationships with her own team when she was in the umpiring position. So when we're not suggesting that these are always difficult or they're not overcomable, but it just needs considering really.
Yeah. So we think about the different code of conduct that might be needed, and it might be that you have a one-size-fits-all, but are people going through that with the young person so they know? How are they building the technical knowledge and the new skills? And there's a large amount around this that they need to build in confidence. And again, reflecting back on what Lauren said, it has taken her a while to build this confidence in her role as an official, to make sure her judgment is sound. And the support that she's had from the national governing body has gone a long way to reinforce that confidence. You know, there is this assumed duty of care towards other children. Are they aware of that? Are we clear to those young people that they have to recognise and respond to concerns that they see? And, you know, are they going on the appropriate course for them? I think we looked at the negative attitude of some adults, and it's not just parents, it's other people in sports, more senior referees, or maybe kind of older referees who don't see the value or recognise, respect the calls of some of the younger officials, and making sure they've got access to support and advice. Now, these are kind of clearly challenges, but the kind of sending it back to you guys listening is what in your organisation in terms of helping someone navigate this and make it as easy as possible. Because if people are coming across negative experiences, they may not continue on this road, and that's what we want. We want people like Lauren who are enjoying what they do and get a lot out of it, but they are the lifeblood of your organisation. So the next bit I want you to consider is, what are the main changes and challenges for the organisation, or even the clubs really, from that perspective? There's some really good questions, and we're going to come back to these at the end of the webinar. But if we just go through with some of these things that are coming on.
So some of the stuff is, I guess, for organisations is, and this is, I guess, from our point of view, about thinking ahead and planning and having the right stuff in place, having anticipated some of the issues. So some of them are very obvious. There are clearly adjustments to be made, not only for the young people, but for people that operate around them or they come into contact with. I think something that's not often thought about in relation to moves within sport, as opposed to when you join sport, is the notion of kind of inducting people into their new role. So somebody who's a familiar face who is just sliding into a different role, quite often people aren't thinking as clearly as they would if they were arriving new about what they need to be inducted into. So there may be very obvious things that remain the same about the sport and the club and whatever, but there are also things that we've already begun to mention that are very different and very new and that need to be explicitly addressed. The fact is that the young person assumes a duty of care towards other children. I guess we have had a question about is that appropriate? I guess my response to that would be, I think there are issues that relate to support and the overall responsibility of the organisation or organiser to build into this. So when we are saying let's support young people who perhaps at 14, 15 may be in coaching roles or developing coaching roles, they will have a duty of care because they're in a position of trust. Whether that translates into would it be acceptable for them to be in sole charge of or solely responsible for a group of young people, I don't think that would be appropriate. So whilst I think there are ways that the organisation needs to look at the way that they can guarantee overall supervision and duty of care of groups with young people, without necessarily stopping them having the opportunity to develop these kind of skills. So some of these safe recruitment processes, I guess, if I was the parent of a child in a group of children where we have a new coach, whether that's somebody that's very young or is an adult, I would expect there to have been a process that the organisation's undertaken to satisfy themselves that that person is suitable for that kind of role. And we've mentioned part of that is in relation to the kind of training and the continuous professional development requirements. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to read through some of the questions that we've had on training. Michelle, can you see those?
Just about the appropriate training for young people and dealing with safeguarding concerns and making sure they have access to it.
Yeah, I think what's clear in Lauren's case that she attended one of the standard safeguarding and protecting young children in sport courses, which is fine, but a number of you will be aware that actually there are some issues with young people attending courses that are kind of aimed at an adult audience and talk about child protection and safeguarding children from a very adult perspective. And I know Sports Coach UK have got a course that's more suitable and has been deliberately formulated to meet the needs better of younger people. So, for example, a young person talking about safeguarding is likely to be in social groups with people for whom that's a very real thing, or much closer to their own experience of some negative things, which means that we just need to take care in how we get across some of our messages regarding safeguarding.
Bianca's come back to saying if you're going on the standard SPC and you're under 18, you should have a chaperone. And Jude's reminded us that there is a 16 to 18 SPC available.
Two very good points. Yeah. Okay. I guess the key bits for me, in particular, going back to this stuff that we've got on screen, are the last 2 points. So one is about clarity for the young person and the stakeholders about what this change actually means. I know we've mentioned that, and I'm going to say the word support again because that absolutely comes across loud and clear. And the other thing is to actually take care and time to understand what it is that young people want as individuals to get out of this particular role. You know, I thought Lauren expressed the kind of range of possibilities. We might have some that are aiming for the Olympics and in officiating terms, and other people that are just enjoying the kind of contact and the interaction and operating at club level. Okay, ready to move on? So coming back to, and we've got a little bit of an overlap here, but we just wanted to consider the kind of safeguarding considerations for organisations and clubs that fall out of the discussions that we've kind of have really. So we do need a process to confirm a young person's suitability for a particular role in just the same way as we would say that about an adult person and a role. We need to take care to understand both in terms of the role, the context, and the individual young person's instance, that expectations on them from anyone don't outstrip their age or their experience and maturity. We need to help young people to understand what will for many of them be new safeguarding responsibilities, so they move from being the subject of safeguarding processes and procedures to being someone who might have a responsibility for acting on them is quite significant. There is the potential, as there is everywhere, for poor practice and grooming or abuse by young people in positions of trust. So the same rules of engagement and the safeguards have to be in place, and that's why Michelle mentioned earlier the importance of codes of conduct. So the code of conduct typically for a young participant is not going to match the code of conduct for somebody in a formal role, and we need to make sure that that transition is understood and happens. We need to consider the rules around relationships with young participants, and this is not just in terms of sexual relationships, but just that how you get on with people for whom last week you were purely a peer, and this week you might have some degree of authority and clout. We need to be mindful of the potential exploitation of young people in positions of trust by other adults and the additional opportunities that might arise. Absolutely critically, how do we support them in the widest possible sense in their new role? Absolute rule of thumb: do not lose sight of the fact that young people are young people, regardless of whether they're just in inverted commas participating or whether they're assuming roles. We also have a clear responsibility to them as young people in their own right. And I guess one thing that's come out as the more that we've thought about this is quite a lot of what we're discussing and what Lauren's mentioned. A lot of times I'm thinking, I think some of that goes on. I think people will maybe be thinking about that or addressing it. Actually, that's not very clever if we start thinking about people moving roles or there being different people coming into the orbit of young people in positions of trust. So I think one of our messages would be, are arrangements kind of checkable? Is there a formal sense of we know what we need to consider for each young person moving into that role? Is that recorded anywhere? And do we monitor whether or not these things are happening? Because like Michelle says, failing to do that is going to result in more bad things happening, less satisfaction on the part of young people, and a fallout from roles for people that we desperately need. We want more people like Lauren involved in sport.
We've had a really good question from Denise just about what does the process to confirm young people's suitability for the role look like?
Okay, well, I guess in principle, and again, I would come back very simplistically and saying if I was the parent of a child for whom they're going to be responsible, what am I expecting? And I'm expecting there to be an equivalent role that there would be for adults taking on that kind of role. Clearly, if we were talking about the dreaded DBS checks, they can only be undertaken on under 16-year-olds, but we have had experience where for people younger than that, and for in fact young people older than that, volunteers have actually been required to get some sort of reference, for example, from their head teacher or from somebody at the college, somebody that can comment on both the type of role and their suitability for it. My personal view is I don't think that just being young in a role absolves an organisation from taking the same amount of due care to checking out their suitability. Does that answer that?
That's good, thank you. So one of the things that we're trying to look at is, have we got any examples, or have you got any examples of policies and procedures that you would be happy to share with us, or templates? We're looking at building some of these examples that we could share with you on email following the webinar, but also maybe move towards hosting this on the CPSU website along with this webinar recording. Because I think people are developing these things and people are at different points of their journey. So it would be really good if people are happy to share, they can send it through to the CPSU at nspcc.org.uk email address, and then we can collate them and share that out for you. So we're kind of coming towards the end of the webinar, so we've got some time for some questions. So we've had them as we're going through, so you'll have to just bear with me a second. So Amanda has asked, where would you place the role of team captains in this discussion in terms of support and training? So not necessarily a position of trust, but it's the step between playing and a position of trust. I think it's a really interesting conversation, and I'm not quite sure what sport you're from. I think the team captain role is often around what's happening on the court or wherever the sport is being played, rather than the welfare responsibility of the team. But I think only you will be able to kind of answer that in terms of that role within the sport.
Yeah, I could refer. I seem to remember, and don't hold me to this, but I seem to remember a conversation with cricket where the role of captain is very specific and specifically different to the role of captains in quite a lot of other sports, where there was a consideration about safe recruitment processes for people captaining. And I think exactly like Michelle said, I think there's consideration of what it means. What we'll always say is the two considerations are the person themselves and the role. So it depends on the nature of that particular role. So captain means different things in different sports and maybe in different contexts within the same sport.
One of the questions that's come through is around the safeguarding support for the young person. And I think when we listened to Lauren's experience, she went and had the support of the head referee. She clearly had quite a lot of support through the national governing body. But it is about formalising this responsibility, because they are young people and they have a legal responsibility. As an organisation, you have a legal responsibility to safeguard them as well as the young people they're working with. So in terms of dealing with some of the challenging behaviour that Lauren talked about, there was clear procedures in place that any concerns would go to the head ref for that event, or it would go through to the national governing body depending on the nature of the concern, or both in the case that she explained. So I think from, what should be in place is about planning for this and making sure that those questions are asked before an incident comes up. So any of you that has dealt with a safeguarding concern, that is not the time to start scratching around and trying to figure out what it is you're meant to be doing. And I think that would be even tougher if you were a young person in that role.
We did have a question earlier that was basically, is 14 the minimum age for a young leader? And I don't think you'll find us saying yes or no to that. I'm gonna say exactly what we've said previously, because it depends on two or maybe three key things. One would be, what's the nature of the role? The second one would be what's required of the young person and whether they meet it. And the third will be what's the nature and degree of support that can be built in by the organisation, with those first two being considered. So I could imagine that I would not want to be saying there is nothing in kind of formal role that young people younger than 14 could possibly begin to undertake through sport, but that should be subject to a very, very clear understanding of the nature and limits and extent of their involvement in that the person is geared up for doing that, and that the organisation is geared up for supporting them. So clearly the support needs are going to rise the lower down the age range that you might go. So there would be some roles that absolutely a 13-year-old shouldn't be doing, or a 14-year-old shouldn't be doing, but there'll be others where, and it's about sports people knowing their own sport and their own context, where there are real potential to start people off on that journey earlier on.
There's been quite a few questions and comments really about getting parents and adults not to challenge is really, really hard. And what we're not saying is we've not got a magic wand for this. Some of this stuff is going to happen. There are things that you can put in place to try and minimise it. But I think what we're saying is there a process in place to help the young people deal with this when it does arise? So making sure that there is links to the national governing body or a more senior person or an adult that can take responsibility for some of this. So someone has asked, does a young coach who may be more qualified than his or her adult helper have to work in sight of another responsible adult who is there just for the young coach's support? I think if I'm reading that right, I think it's not necessarily about the level of qualification in this case. I think it's about the adult carrying out that duty of care role. Because although, you know, if we take Lauren as an example, you know, she's incredibly competent and responsible for those young people, but there will be someone there who is responsible for the overall responsibility for them.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's about it. I think there's probably a few more, but I think we're running out of time. So I just wanted to say thank you so much to Lauren for joining us. I think what she's added to the webinar has been really, really useful. And I think there's been lots of well dones and thank yous that have come through on the questions. So that I will share that with Lauren. Thanks. If there is anything else that you would like to share with us, then obviously come to us on the CPSU inbox. And yeah, we hope to see you again webinar soon.